The cold was a familiar ache in Julian Vance's bones. It settled deep, a chill that had nothing to do with the December air biting at his exposed cheeks and everything to do with the hollow space inside his chest. He sat on a park bench, a statue carved from grief, clad in a cashmere coat that cost more than most people's rent but offered no real warmth. Around him, the world was a symphony of life he could no longer hear. Children's laughter was a sharp, painful sound, the cheerful glow of Christmas lights, a cruel mockery of the darkness he inhabited. His gloved fingers were clenched around a small, cold object in his pocket, a silver locket. It was smooth, worn from 5 years of constant touch. Inside was a tiny, smiling photograph of Sarah, her eyes bright with a future that had been stolen in the screech of tires on black ice. He didn't need to open it. Her face was etched onto the back of his eyelids, the ghost of her perfume, a constant faint scent in his memory. This park, this bench, had been theirs. They had talked about bringing their own child here one day, to push on the swings and build clumsy snowmen. Now he came alone. It was a ritual of self-punishment, a pilgrimage to the site of a dream that had died. He was the CEO of a tech empire, a man whose name commanded respect in boardrooms and financial papers. But here, he was just a man haunted by the ghosts of what might have been. The festive cheer was an assault, each joyful family a fresh stab of a well-known blade. He watched them without seeing, his gaze fixed on a past only he could perceive. A short distance away, Elara pulled her daughter's thin, woolen hat down further over her ears. Lily's cheeks were bright pink, a perfect match for her slightly too small coat. A fresh wave of anxiety washed over Elara, cold and sharp like the wind. The illustration commissions had been sparse lately, and the rent was due next week. She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the pure, unadulterated joy on Lily's face as she watched a squirrel scamper up a snow-dusted oak tree. For Lily, the world was still a place of wonder. A dusting of snow was magic. A squirrel was a woodland acrobat. A stern-faced man sitting alone on a bench was a mystery to be solved. Elara's life was a constant, quiet struggle, a careful balancing act of bills and groceries. But in moments like these, watching her daughter, none of it mattered. Lily's happiness was the sun that warmed her world, chasing away the shadows of their precarious existence. They had come to the park because it was free, and because Lily loved the festive lights that winked on as dusk began to settle. Elara held her daughter's mittened hand, its warmth a small anchor in the vast, indifferent city. She noticed the man on the bench. He looked out of place in his exquisitely tailored coat, a dark silhouette against the cheerful backdrop. There was a profound stillness about him, a loneliness so palpable it seemed to radiate a cold of its own, pushing the festive atmosphere away. She felt a brief empathetic pang for him before turning her attention back to Lily. "Mommy, look, the squirrel is waving at me," Lily squealed, her voice a tiny silver bell in the crisp air. Elara smiled, a genuine, tired smile that lit up her face. "I think he is, sweetie. Maybe he wants to wish you a Merry Christmas." Lily's eyes, wide and curious, drifted from the tree back to the solitary man. He hadn't moved a muscle. He just sat there, staring at nothing. Her 5-year-old mind, a place of logic, both simple and profound, began to connect the dots. He was old like her grandpa. He had a very serious face, like the pictures of important people in books. And it was almost Christmas. The conclusion was obvious. Before Elara could react, Lily let go of her hand. The sudden absence of that small warmth was an instant alarm. She turned just in time to see her daughter, a tiny figure in a pink coat, marching with unwavering purpose directly towards the lonely, imposing man. Her heart leaped into her throat. Julian was lost in the memory of Sarah's laugh when a small voice cut through the fog. "Mister." He blinked, the sound so unexpected it felt like a hallucination. He slowly lowered his gaze. Standing before him was a little girl, her head tilted, her expression one of intense, serious scrutiny. Her nose was red from the cold, and a few strands of blonde hair had escaped her woolen hat. She looked at him, not with fear, but with a clinical curiosity that was utterly disarming. He didn't respond. Words were foreign objects in his throat, rusted from disuse in any context outside a boardroom. The little girl took his silence as an invitation to continue her assessment. She looked at his dark, expensive coat, his polished leather shoes, and the somber expression that seemed carved into his features. She took a small step closer, her breath misting in the air. "Are you Santa?" she asked. The question was not playful or teasing. It was a genuine inquiry, delivered with the gravity of a scientist proposing a new theory. The words struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. Santa, a figure of joy, of giving, of magic, everything he was not, the absurdity of it, the sheer, innocent misinterpretation of his entire being, cracked something deep inside him. A fissure appeared in the ice that had encased his heart for 5 long years. He could only stare, speechless, at the small child who had just mistaken his shroud of grief for a suit of seasonal cheer. "Lily!" Elara's voice was breathless with apology as she hurried forward, her boots crunching in the thin layer of snow. "I am so sorry. She didn't mean to bother you." She reached for her daughter's hand, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Come on, sweetie. You shouldn't talk to strangers." Lily, however, was not deterred. She ignored her mother's gentle tug, her eyes still locked on Julian. "But Mommy, he might be. He looks very important and a little bit sad. Maybe his reindeer are tired." A sound escaped Julian's lips. It was a rough, dry thing, halfway between a cough and a choke. He realized, with a distant sense of shock, that it was the start of a laugh. The sound died before it could fully form, but the impulse, the ghost of an emotion other than pain, was there. He looked from the mortified mother to the determined child. "It's all right," he said, his voice raspy. The 2 words felt like pulling stones from his throat. He looked at the little girl, at Lily. "No," he said, the word softer this time. "I'm not Santa." Lily's face fell with a hint of disappointment, but her curiosity remained. "Oh, well, are you lost then? You look lost." That second question hit him harder than the first, because it was true. He was profoundly, irrevocably lost, lost in his own life, lost in the past, a ghost haunting the edges of the living world. This small child, with her simple, direct questions, had seen him more clearly than anyone had in years. She had looked past the fortress of wealth and power and seen the lost man inside. He saw Elara shiver, pulling her own worn coat tighter around herself. He noticed, for the first time, how thin it was, inadequate for the biting wind. He saw Lily's mittens, knitted and slightly frayed at the fingertips. A sudden, unfamiliar impulse moved through him. It was a desire to fix something, to offer some small comfort in a world where he had long since given up on the concept. "You're both cold," he stated. It wasn't a question. "There's a cafe across the street. Let me buy you a hot chocolate." Elara's immediate instinct was to refuse. She was wary of strangers, especially wealthy men whose kindness might come with strings attached. But then she looked at Lily, whose eyes had lit up at the mention of hot chocolate, and she looked at the man's face. The deep sadness in his eyes seemed genuine, not predatory. There was no artifice there, only a vast, echoing emptiness. The offer felt less like a proposition and more like a plea for a moment of human connection. "We couldn't possibly impose," she started, the polite refusal automatic on her lips. "Please," Julian said, and the word was raw with an emotion he couldn't name. He needed this brief 10-minute reprieve from his own solitude. "It's the least I can do for Santa's helper." He directed the last part to Lily, a faint ghost of a smile touching his lips. Lily giggled, her mission of inquiry complete, and a new mission of chocolate now on the horizon. She looked up at her mother with pleading eyes. Elara hesitated for another moment, her protective instincts warring with the undeniable kindness in the stranger's gesture. She looked at his lonely eyes again and made a decision. "All right," she said softly. "Thank you. That's very kind of you, Mr. Julian," he supplied. "My name is Julian." The cafe was a haven of warmth and light, a stark contrast to the encroaching twilight and bitter cold outside. The air smelled of coffee, cinnamon, and melting sugar. Soft jazz music played from hidden speakers, and the low hum of quiet conversation filled the space. For Julian, stepping inside was like entering another dimension, one where comfort and gentle joy were the default state. His own home was silent, cavernous, and cold, filled with echoes and memories. This place was alive. He led them to a small, secluded booth in the corner, its plush, red seats offering a sense of privacy. He helped Elara with her coat, his movements stiff and unpracticed. He was used to valets and assistants, not these small, personal gestures of courtesy. He felt clumsy, out of his depth. He watched as Elara carefully unwrapped Lily's scarf and took off her hat, her movements fluid and full of a gentle, practiced care that made his heart ache with a forgotten familiarity. A waitress soon arrived, and Julian ordered 2 hot chocolates with extra whipped cream for Lily and Elara, and a black coffee for himself. When the drinks came, Lily's eyes went wide at the mountain of cream and chocolate sprinkles on her mug. She plunged her spoon in with a delighted gasp, emerging with a perfect dollop that she promptly put in her mouth, leaving a white moustache on her upper lip. Elara laughed, a soft, warm sound that seemed to fill the small space around their table. She reached over with a napkin. "You have a little something there, sweetie." Julian watched the simple, intimate exchange, a silent observer at the edge of a world he did not belong to. He saw the easy affection between mother and daughter, the unspoken language of love in a gentle touch and a shared smile. It was a diorama of the life he was supposed to have had, and the sight of it should have been agonizing. But strangely, it wasn't. Here, in the warm glow of the cafe, with the scent of chocolate in the air, the pain was muted. It was replaced by a quiet, wistful longing. "So," Elara began, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. She wrapped her hands around her warm mug, a gesture that was both grateful and a little nervous. "Do you work near here, Julian?" He was momentarily taken aback by the simple, normal question. People didn't ask him about his day. They asked for his quarterly projections, his market analysis, his signature on a multi-million-dollar deal. They spoke to the CEO, not the man. "My office is a few blocks away," he said, the answer feeling inadequate. "Vance Technologies." He saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Everyone in the city knew the name. The gleaming skyscraper with his name on it was a landmark. Her expression shifted slightly, a new layer of caution settling in. He was not just a lonely man on a bench. He was Julian Vance, a figure of immense wealth and power. He saw the wall begin to go up in her eyes, the polite distance returning. He felt a desperate urge to tear it down. "I was, taking a break," he added quickly, the lie feeling clumsy on his tongue. "It's been a long day." She nodded, accepting the explanation without comment. She sipped her hot chocolate, her gaze thoughtful. He could feel her trying to reconcile the man from the headlines with the sad, quiet person sitting across from her. Lily, oblivious to the adult undercurrents, piped up with her whipped cream mustache still intact. "My mummy is an artist," she announced proudly. "She draws magic pictures." Julian turned his attention to Elara, a genuine spark of interest kindling within him. "An artist?" Elara's cheeks colored slightly. "I'm an illustrator. Mostly freelance work for children's books when I can get it." The last phrase was quiet, tinged with the familiar worry she tried so hard to hide. "She drew a dragon that breathes flowers instead of fire," Lily elaborated, her voice full of awe. A real smile touched Julian's lips this time. It felt foreign, like stretching a muscle he hadn't used in years. "A flower-breathing dragon. I'd like to see that." It's to show that not everything scary is mean, Elara explained softly, her passion for her work momentarily overriding her shyness. Sometimes things that look fierce are just sad or misunderstood. Her words resonated in the quiet space of Julian's chest, a fierce dragon that was just sad. He felt an uncanny sense of being seen, of being understood by a woman who knew nothing about him, yet somehow knew everything. He looked at her, truly looked at her. For the first time, he saw the tiredness around her kind eyes, the faint lines of worry on her brow, but he also saw a deep well of strength and a quiet resilience. He saw the creator of flower-breathing dragons. An idea began to form in his mind, audacious and completely out of character. His company had a charitable foundation. Every year, they sponsored a community project. It was usually something sterile, corporate, a new wing for a hospital, a scholarship fund. It was always handled by his board, a press release, a photo opportunity. But this year, my company's foundation, he began, speaking slowly, the idea taking shape as he spoke. We have an annual children's outreach program. We were looking for a new project, a storybook perhaps, something unique for the local children's hospital. Elara's eyes widened, a flicker of hope so bright it was almost painful to see. A storybook? A story about a dragon, Julian continued, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. A dragon that breathes flowers. He looked at her directly, his gaze steady. I'd like to commission you to create it. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotion. Elara stared at him, her mind racing. It was charity, of course. He pitied her. The thought stung her pride. But then she looked at his face, at the earnest, almost pleading look in his eyes. It didn't feel like pity. It felt like a lifeline, thrown by one lonely person to another. And she thought of the overdue rent, of the new coat Lily so desperately needed. She thought of the chance to do what she loved, to bring her art to life. I don't know what to say, she stammered, overwhelmed. Say you'll come by my office tomorrow to discuss it, Julian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Yet it was not unkind. It was the decisive voice of a CEO, but it was tempered with something else, something softer. 10 o'clock. We can work out the details. He slid a sleek black business card across the table. The name, Julian Vance, was embossed in simple, elegant silver letters. It felt heavy in her hand, a tangible symbol of a world so far removed from her own. Lily, having finished her hot chocolate, was now drawing on a napkin with a borrowed pen from her mother's purse. She held it up for Julian to see. It was a wobbly drawing of 3 stick figures, a tall one in a dark coat, a medium one, and a very small one in a pink blob of a coat. They were all holding hands under a lopsided, smiling sun. Julian looked at the simple drawing, and the fissure in his heart cracked a little wider. For the first time in 5 years, a tiny, fragile ray of warmth slipped through. The following weeks fell into a new, unfamiliar rhythm. Elara's visit to Julian's office had been as intimidating as she had feared. The Vance Technologies building was a monument of glass and steel that pierced the winter sky. The lobby was a cavern of polished marble and hushed efficiency. Yet, when she was ushered into Julian's penthouse office, she found him waiting for her not behind his enormous desk, but in a small seating area with 2 comfortable chairs and a low table. He had been nothing but professional. Yet there was an undercurrent of gentleness to his demeanor. He listened intently as she nervously showed him her portfolio, his gaze lingering on her sketches with genuine interest. The contract he offered was more generous than she could have imagined. It was enough to cover her rent for a year, to buy Lily a proper winter coat, to finally breathe without the constant weight of financial fear pressing down on her. But it became more than just a business arrangement. Julian insisted on regular progress meetings, not in his sterile office, but in the same warm cafe where they had first talked. He said he wanted to be in a more creative environment. Elara knew, however, that it was an excuse. These meetings quickly became the highlight of her week. Lily always came with them. Settling into their corner booth with a hot chocolate and a sketchbook of her own, Julian would watch, silent and observant, as Elara's pencil flew across the page, bringing the flower-breathing dragon to life. He saw the story unfold, a tale of a lonely dragon, feared for its appearance, who only wanted to share the beauty it created. He saw himself in the creature's sad, gentle eyes. He saw Elara's own quiet strength and kindness reflected in the brave little girl who befriends the dragon in the story. He started to open up, slowly, tentatively. He didn't speak of the accident, not yet, but he spoke of other things. He told her about his childhood, about growing up in a house that was large and empty, with parents who were more interested in their social standing than their son. He spoke of his love for old books and classical music, small personal details he had never shared with anyone. In return, Elara told him about her dreams of having a small art studio, of her love for gardening in the few pots she kept on her tiny apartment balcony. She spoke of Lily's father, a man who had been scared off by the reality of impending parenthood, leaving her to face it all alone. She spoke not with bitterness, but with a quiet acceptance that Julian found astounding. She had faced her own losses, her own hardships, yet she had not allowed them to extinguish the light inside her. One snowy afternoon, as they sat in the cafe, the city outside blanketed in a pristine white, Lily looked up from her drawing. She had been quiet for a long time, concentrating intently. She looked at Julian, her expression serious. "Julian," she said, using his first name with the easy familiarity of a child, "are you sad because your family is in heaven?" The air left Julian's lungs. Elara gasped softly, moving to gently scold her daughter. "Lily, that's not a polite thing to ask." But Julian held up a hand, stopping her. He looked at the small, earnest face across the table, at the eyes that held no judgment, only a pure, simple desire to understand. He couldn't lie to her. He couldn't hide from her. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he whispered, the word a painful exhalation. "Yes, I am." It was the first time he had admitted it aloud, to another soul. For 5 years, his grief had been a private, silent thing, a secret chamber in his heart that he never allowed anyone to enter. "My wife," he began, the words tasting like rust and sorrow. "Her name was Sarah. We were expecting a baby, a little girl." His voice cracked on the last 2 words. He reached into his pocket, his fingers finding the familiar cold comfort of the silver locket. This time, instead of just holding it, he pulled it out and placed it gently on the table. He fumbled with the clasp, his fingers trembling. He opened it and turned it for Elara and Lily to see. The tiny, smiling face of his wife looked up at them. He didn't have a picture of the daughter they never got to meet. "There was an accident," he said, his voice flat, stripped of all emotion. "A car accident, 5 years ago, on a night just like this one. The snow was coming down." Elara's hand instinctively covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears for this man and the immense tragedy he carried so silently. She didn't offer empty platitudes or condolences. She simply sat there, her presence a warm, steady anchor in his storm of memory. Her silence was a gift, a space for his grief to exist without judgment. Lily, in her infinite childish wisdom, did not focus on the sadness. She pointed a small mittened finger at the photograph. "She's very pretty. Does she have a flower name?" Julian blinked, confused. "A flower name?" "Like me," Lily said. "I'm a lily. And Mommy calls me her little rose sometimes. Pretty things have flower names." A tear slid down Julian's cheek, hot and unexpected. He hadn't cried in years. "We were going to name her Olivia," he said softly. "But Sarah loved lilies, white lilies." Lily beamed as if he had just revealed a wonderful secret. She slid out of the booth and came to stand beside him, She reached out and placed her small, warm hand on his arm. It was a simple, grounding touch. "It's okay," she said, her voice full of a certainty that defied her age. "Now you have me, and you have Mommy. We can be your family now." And with those simple words, the walls around Julian's heart did not just crack, they crumbled. He looked from the innocent, trusting face of the child to the compassionate, tear-filled eyes of her mother. He saw not pity, but acceptance. He saw not a replacement for what he had lost, but a chance for something new, something he never thought he would have again. A beginning. The weeks leading up to Christmas Eve were filled with a fragile, burgeoning happiness. Julian, Elara, and Lily became an unlikely trio. Their time together, extending beyond the cafe meetings, he took them to the city's grand ice rink, where he found himself laughing for the first time in years as he stumbled on the ice, holding Lily's hands while Elara watched from the sidelines, her own smile bright and unguarded. He took them to a Christmas market, buying Lily a small hand-carved wooden bird and Elara a soft, warm cashmere scarf in a deep shade of blue that matched her eyes. For Elara, it felt like waking from a long dream. The constant thrum of anxiety that had been her companion for so long began to fade, replaced by a sense of security and a hesitant, fluttering hope. She saw the man behind the myth, the gentle, wounded soul beneath the formidable exterior of Julian Vance. She found herself falling for his quiet kindness, the way his eyes would soften when he looked at Lily, the rare, breathtaking smile that would transform his entire face. Julian felt himself changing, thawing from the inside out. The world was slowly regaining its color. The sound of Lily's laughter no longer felt like a painful reminder of what he had lost, but a beautiful sound in its own right. The sight of Elara, her head bent over her sketchbook, her brow furrowed in concentration, filled him with a warmth and admiration that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He was starting to feel again, and the intensity of it scared him. The trigger came, as it often does, without warning. It was the night of the Vance Technologies' annual Christmas Gala. It was a lavish, mandatory affair he had always dreaded, a performance of corporate cheer that felt hollow and false. In previous years, he would make a brief appearance, shake a few hands, and leave within the hour. This year, for the first time, he had considered asking Elara to accompany him. The thought of walking into that ballroom with her on his arm, of introducing her to his world, filled him with a mixture of pride and profound fear. He was standing by the enormous, glittering Christmas tree in the hotel ballroom, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand, when an old business acquaintance, a man named Marcus, approached him. Marcus was with his wife, who was holding their new baby, a bundle of pink blankets and soft gurgles. "Julian, good to see you out and about," Marcus said, with a hearty slap on the back. "You look well, really well." He gestured to his wife and child. "This is our little Amelia." Julian offered a tight, polite smile, his eyes fixed on the baby. She looked so small, so perfect, a ghost of a memory. A phantom kick against his palm shot through him. Olivia, Marcus's wife, smiled kindly. "It's so wonderful to see you here, Julian. Sarah would have wanted you to be happy, to find someone new." The words were meant to be kind, a clumsy offering of support. But to Julian, they were a lit match thrown into a room full of gasoline. Find someone new. As if Sarah could be replaced. As if the life they had built, the future they had planned, could simply be swapped out for another. A wave of guilt and panic, so powerful it made him dizzy, crashed over him. What was he doing? He was laughing, he was smiling, he was letting himself feel for Elara and her daughter. He was building a new life on the ashes of the old one. He was betraying Sarah. He was forgetting her. The fear was a cold, sharp claw in his gut. The fragile happiness of the past weeks suddenly felt like a monstrous infidelity. He made a curt excuse and fled the ballroom, the sound of festive music and laughter chasing him down the marble corridor. He went straight home, to his vast, silent mansion, a place that suddenly felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. He walked through the dark, empty rooms, each one a testament to the life he had lost. He saw Sarah everywhere, in the curve of a chair she had loved, in the scent of dried roses on the mantelpiece, in the echo of her laughter that only he could hear. He had plans to meet Elara and Lily the next day, Christmas Eve. They were going to look at the department store window displays and then have dinner. He picked up his phone, his hands shaking. He couldn't do it. He couldn't face them. He couldn't pretend to be the happy, healing man they thought he was. He was a fraud. He was a ghost, tied to another ghost. He typed out a message, his words as cold and sharp as shards of ice. "Something has come up. I can't make it tomorrow. I'll be in touch about the project after the holidays." He hit send before he could lose his nerve. He turned the phone off, cutting the connection, severing the lifeline he had so desperately clung to. He retreated, back into the familiar, miserable comfort of his grief, pulling the darkness around him like a shroud. Elara read the text message 3 times, the cheerful lights of her small Christmas tree blurring through her tears. The words were so cold, so distant. The project. He had reduced their connection, their shared laughter and quiet confessions, back to a simple business transaction. The pain was sharp and immediate, a physical ache in her chest. She had been a fool. She had allowed herself to hope, to believe that a man like Julian Vance could see something in a woman like her. She had mistaken his kindness for something more. It had all been charity, a rich man's fleeting project to assuage his own loneliness. Now the project was over, and he was retreating back to his own world, leaving her behind. She had to face Lily in the morning and tell her that their Christmas Eve plans with Julian were cancelled. The thought of seeing the disappointment on her daughter's face was almost more than she could bear. She wrapped her arms around herself, the warmth of the cashmere scarf he had given her suddenly feeling like a cruel joke. The silence of her small apartment felt as vast and empty as Julian's must be. Julian spent Christmas Eve in a self-imposed prison of memory. He didn't answer his phone, didn't look at his emails. He sat in the dark, the silver locket clutched in his hand, forcing himself to remember every detail of that last day with Sarah. He tried to conjure the pain, to re-inhabit the grief, believing it was the only thing that was truly his, the only honest emotion he had left. But something had changed. The grief was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was no longer all-consuming. The darkness was now punctuated by unwelcome flashes of light. Lily's delighted face, covered in whipped cream, Elara's soft smile across a cafe table, the feel of Lily's small hand in his. These new memories were an intrusion, a betrayal, and he fought them back with a desperate ferocity. He was loyal to his pain. He owed Sarah that much. Late in the afternoon, he put on the coat he had worn to the Christmas market. As he shoved his hands into the pockets, his fingers brushed against a piece of folded paper. He pulled it out. It was one of Lily's drawings, one she must have tucked into his pocket when he wasn't looking. He unfolded it under the dim light of a single lamp. It was a crayon drawing, rendered with a child's charming lack of perspective. There were 3 figures, a tall man, a woman, and a little girl, holding hands in front of a Christmas tree. Above their heads, Lily had drawn a lopsided angel with a familiar, smiling face from the photograph in his locket. Sarah. She wasn't gone. She was watching over them. Below the drawing, in wobbly, uncertain letters, Lily had written a simple message. "For our family. So, no one is sad." He stared at the drawing, at the profound, simple truth of it. Lily hadn't seen his connection with her and Elara as a replacement for Sarah. She had simply made room for her. She had integrated his past with his present, creating a family big enough to hold both his grief and his new, burgeoning love. She had understood what he, in his fear, could not. Love wasn't a finite resource. A new love didn't diminish the old one. It was possible to honor the dead while still choosing to live. The drawing fell from his trembling hands. A great shuddering sob tore through him, the first of many. He wept for Sarah, for Olivia, for the 5 years he had lost in the grey fog of grief, and he wept for the catastrophic mistake he had just made, for the warmth and light he had so callously pushed away out of fear. He realized with devastating clarity that by trying to be loyal to Sarah's memory, he was betraying the very essence of the love they had shared, a love that had been about life, about joy, about future. She would never have wanted this for him. She would have wanted him to be happy. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. His fear wasn't costing him the past. The past was already gone. His fear was costing him his future. He had to fix it. Now. He grabbed his car keys, his heart pounding with a desperate urgency. He ran out of the house and into the falling snow, not bothering to lock the door behind him. The night was cold and dark, the snow coming down in thick, silent flakes, just as it had 5 years ago. But this time, he wasn't driving away from a tragedy. He was driving toward his only hope for a future. The drive to Elara's apartment was a blur of snow-swept streets and frantic prayer. He didn't know what he would say. He only knew he had to see her, to make her understand. He parked haphazardly on the street outside her modest apartment building and ran to the entrance, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He stood outside her door, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could hear the faint sound of a Christmas carol coming from inside. He raised a shaking hand and knocked. The music stopped. After a moment of silence, the door opened a crack. Elara stood there, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed and wary. She was wearing an old, comfortable sweater, and the blue scarf he had given her was draped over a chair behind her. "Julian," she said, her voice barely a whisper. There was no anger in it, only a deep, bottomless hurt. "Elara," he breathed, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Can I come in? Please." She hesitated for a long moment, then slowly swung the door open. He stepped inside, into the small, warm space that was her home. It was simply decorated, but filled with a love and personality that his own mansion completely lacked. Her drawings were taped to the walls, and a small, brightly lit Christmas tree stood in the corner, adorned with handmade ornaments. Lily was curled up on the sofa, fast asleep, a picture book resting on her chest. He turned to face Elara, the words tumbling out of him in a raw, desperate torrent. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What I did was unforgivable. My message, it was cruel. I was a coward." She just looked at him, her arms crossed over her chest, waiting. "I panicked," he continued, his voice breaking. "Someone said something, and it made me feel like I was betraying my wife, like I was forgetting her by letting myself be happy with you and Lily." He pulled the locket from his pocket, holding it out on his palm. "I have lived with this, with her ghost, for 5 years. It's all I had left. I thought if I let go of the pain, I would lose her completely." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading with hers. "But I was wrong. Being with you, with Lily, it doesn't make me forget her. It makes me feel alive again. And she would have wanted that. The real betrayal would be letting my fear of the past destroy any chance of a future that I have just realized means nothing without you in it." Tears were streaming down his face now, unchecked. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to let me try to earn it. I love you, Elara. I see you, and I see strength and kindness and a beauty that has nothing to do with my world of money and power. It's real. And Lily..." He glanced at the sleeping child on the sofa, his voice softening to a reverent whisper. "She looked at the saddest, most broken man in the world, and she wasn't afraid. She saved me. You both saved me." He fell silent, his confession hanging in the warm, quiet air between them. He had laid his broken heart bare, offering her all the fractured pieces. Elara had listened, her own tears beginning to fall. She saw the raw, unfiltered agony and hope in his eyes. This was not the cold CEO from the text message. This was the lonely man from the park bench, the man who had looked at her drawings with such gentle reverence. This was Julian. She slowly unfolded her arms and stepped toward him, closing the small distance between them. She reached out and gently wiped a tear from his cheek with her thumb. "You don't have to let go of her," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You just have to make room for us." Relief, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees, washed over him. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent. He held her as if he was drowning, and she was the only solid thing in the world. She held him back, her arms a circle of warmth and acceptance. They stood there for a long time, two broken people, finding solace in each other's embrace, the quiet hum of the Christmas tree, lights bearing witness to their new beginning. A year later, the same park bench was occupied once more. The December air was just as cold, the festive lights just as bright. But the man sitting on the bench was entirely different. Julian Vance was no longer a statue of grief. He was vibrant, alive, his face relaxed in a constant, easy smile. Lily was perched on his lap, bundled in a proper new winter coat, her laughter echoing in the crisp air as she pointed out squirrels and dogs. She was telling him a long, elaborate story about the flower-breathing dragon from the book her mother had created. A book that now sat in the rooms of hundreds of children across the city, a bestseller sponsored by the Vance Foundation. Elara was leaning against him, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. Her hand was laced through his, her engagement ring catching the light of the setting sun. Her other hand rested on the slight, gentle curve of her stomach, a silent, joyful secret shared between the three of them. Julian's free hand rested protectively over hers. He was no longer clutching the silver locket in his pocket. It now rested in a place of honor on his bedside table, next to a framed crayon drawing of a family, a man, a woman, a little girl, and a tiny new baby, all watched over by a smiling angel in the sky. He had learned that memories were not ghosts to be feared, but foundations upon which a new life could be built. He looked at Elara, at the love and peace in her eyes, and then down at Lily, who was now chattering away about what Santa might bring her new baby brother or sister. He felt a sense of peace so profound it filled every hollow space within him. The cold was gone, replaced by a warmth that radiated from the two people beside him, a warmth that had nothing to do with his cashmere coat and everything to do with the feeling of being home. A young couple walked by, pushing a stroller, and they smiled at the idyllic family scene on the bench. They saw a happy man, a loving woman, and a joyful child. They had no idea that only a year ago that same man had been a ghost, invisible and lost in his own private winter. Julian pressed a soft kiss to the top of Elara's head, his heart overflowing with a gratitude that was too immense for words. The innocent question of a little girl, a question born of pure, simple curiosity, had shattered his isolation and led him here to this moment of perfect, unadulterated peace. He was no longer the lonely CEO on a park bench. He was Julian, a husband, a father. He was found,